Okay, so we're going to talk brief history of mountain bike suspension. So the first suspension fork was RockShox RS1, or at least the first sort of commercially available suspension fork. Now, it was designed by Paul Turner, who also designed a bunch of other cool stuff. But that little invention, the dropper seat post, and also had his own whole mountain bike company at one point called Maverick Bikes, who are responsible for various different bikes from the ML7, ML8, and there was even going to be a 29-inch version as well. But they also made the Maverick Speedball seat post. There's a dropper post, and unfortunately Paul Turner was a brilliant inventor, not such a good businessman, because basically Maverick Bikes went bust and the Speedball ended up being sold to Crank Brothers. So it was manufactured as the Crank Brothers Droppelin. Yeah, Droppelin. I'm sure that's the correct name for that. But we'll go back to the suspension forks for now. So, what suspension forks did RockShox first produce? Well, RS1, or RockShox 1, was designed by Paul Turner and manufactured by a company called Diacomp. Now, they were famous for making brakes and stuff like that, and had a lot of experience making various bike parts out of aluminium. So the RockShox RS1 had a three-piece lower design with aluminium legs and a steel brake arch going between each leg. The fork used air over oil via a football needle valve in the top of each leg. Around 50mm of travel, pretty basic by these standards, 1/8 threaded or inch steer, or 1¼ steer I believe. Typical retro, stuff, cantilever mounts, all that kind of thing. So that's the RockShox RS1, their first suspension fork, and it was air over oil, which you might be amazed to hear about. They didn't stay like that for very long. But yeah, so let's get on to the next one. We're talking about the RockShox Mag 21. This thing had magnesium lowers, and yeah, they are bragging about it, baby. Even in the name, the logo is like an M for magnesium. You can see it in that sort of like, it's a bit like the Google M, which is kind of like an apron style. But yeah, so basically they had magnesium lowers, they had adjustable damping, and they were air over oil. So yeah, with more 50mm of travel, magnesium lowers, super lightweight. Both these two forks were kind of trying to mimic a rigid fork in terms of their weight, and as well as the geometry as well, so it didn't lift the front of the bike up. These were designed to fit on old school bikes that were not built for suspension forks, so that was the idea behind it. RockShox also said with the Mag 21 that they had basically made the steer tube as light as possible by making it a pressed insert, which today is fairly common. But back then, that was a big deal. It was pressed in rather than being bolted in. So yeah, that's pretty mad. At least that's what it said on the box. Anyway, you'll see the picture. I've not actually. I have had a set of RS1s and a set of Mag 21s. I've still got the RS1s, although they're not in serviceable condition. Far from it, sadly. Nor were the Mag 21s that I came across either. They were on an old cone of fire. And the whole thing had seen better days, but it got rebuilt with different forks on it. This is way before I was filming stuff and putting stuff on YouTube or anything like that, unfortunately for you guys. So yeah, Mag 21. What came after the Mag 21? Well, there was a few other in-between forks like the Mag 10 and Mag 20, but we won't really cover those as they were just elastomer variants of the Mag 21 and RS1. So the biggest one was the RockShox Judy. First Judy was 60mm travel. It had elastomers. It did have a cartridge damper, so the rebound damping was controlled by a hydraulic cartridge. So the oil was in a sealed unit cartridge, and once the cartridge failed, you had to replace it. Although, trust me, it wouldn't be the cartridge that failed first; it would be the elastomers. Now, what are elastomers, you're probably saying? Is that like springs? Well, sort of like springs. They are made of rubber, and in some cases they're made of microcellular urethane, which is basically rubber with a load of little holes in it that some companies were cheeky enough to call air damping without the hydraulic damper, In 1997, RST came out with a fork called the RST High 5. They claimed it had air damping, but really it was just a vacuum being pulled on the elastomers from the Fig rebounding, and the MCUs, sorry, and the gas bubbles in the MCUs. That was your damping, in quote marks. So, you know, pretty terrible all round. Elastomer forks were bleeding awful, if we're totally honest. Yes, okay, we're focusing here on RockShox and Mazzocchi mostly, but in the 90s there were so many suspension fork companies, it was enough to make your head spin. One I don't know too much about, or I know what happened to them. Okay, so I'll get into a bit of detail here. But you had Stratos, as sort of another oddball company. They made really good quality forks at a machine billet in some cases. Now, they were pretty far ahead of their time, almost certainly equal to Mazzocchi. Never really got the sort of hype, and unfortunately the company went out of business, due to being sued by Specialized for questionable patent infringement. Basically, it came up with an idea of using a one-way valve. So when you press down on the fork from the top, like your pedal, you know, you say you press down on the fork, so they wouldn't move. But an impact from the ground, like over a bump, would open a check valve and allow oil to flow through the damper, and then the fork would move. So essentially a one-way fork. Now, Fox managed to get around Specialized patent with the Terralogic series, but yeah, that's a whole story for another video. In fact, it's not. I'll talk about them in a little bit. So yeah. So RockShox had Judy. Then in 1997, a massive leap in suspension technology would hit the scene. The Mazzocchi Z1 bomber. It literally bombed the competition and was absolutely bomb-proof. Probably one of the biggest events in mountain bike history as far as technology is concerned. This 100mm oil and coil fork with rebound damping was an absolute beast. This thing was smooth as smooth could be. Using motorcycle technology, this thing, you know, it shared the lubrication oil and the damping oil with each other, so the oil that was used for damping also helped lubricate the fork. That might sound normal to a lot of engineers out there who've never dealt with bicycles before, but trust me, because previous forks focused so much on being lightweight, there was hardly any oil in there. It was just generally a bit of grease, elastomers, and if you was lucky you got a bit of oil for hydraulic damping. No, this had a damper in each leg and a spring in each leg, and each leg was filled with oil. Obviously not right to the top because the thing would be hydrolocked, but you get the idea. This was a smooth, burly fork as well. It had 30mm stanchions, 3-piece magnesium lower chassis, and was the ultimate fork of 1997. So yeah, that was pretty awesome. RockShox came out with the Judy, which had 28mm stanchions and 1-piece cast magnesium lowers. It also used a very similar damping system. You take the two apart, it is very similar, but the Mazzocchi had the far superior oil seals and much thicker stanchions, so it was just a better fork all round. It was much cooler as well, in my opinion. That was, you know. But then RockShox decided to up the game. Well, I mean, they had to. They didn't really have a choice here. Innovate or die, as a certain company would say. Or steal someone's patent. Anyway. What was that? Bit of a cough there. So, yeah, basically, RockShox then would come out with a longer travel version of the Judy, the DHO, a dual crown RockShox Judy. Sorry, I called it the Judy. The Judy was referring to the ones of the elastomers. That's not the correct name, it's Judy. But a lot of my friends used to call them the Judy because they just went juddery, so the thing would judder as it rebounded. Yeah. But no, the Judy DHO. Yeah, basically a 100mm travel version of the RockShox Judy. Very sort of similar idea to the Z1. Although not quite. It was a dual crown, still 28mm stanchions. Not a bad fork, certainly for its time. Mountain 2 also had a fork called the Xvert, which is a very similar sort of idea. Although that was sort of, both of these were a little bit lackluster really compared to the Z1. Just not as well built, not as, you know, a bit lighter, but not there. We're not talking quite downhill fork yet. But Mazzocchi's next fork, yeah. That'd be the downhill fork. They came out with the Junior T, which, and you're thinking Junior T. So what was after a Junior T, and what was a Junior T? Junior T had 30mm stanchions and was a triple crown fork. So it's a full-on downhill fork, 170mm of travel. But don't worry, that was only the Junior T, because what was coming next was the Monster T. Yeah, 175mm travel. I believe it was 35mm stanchions on that puppy, and the thing was absolutely massive. Just the width of it, the brace, the whole way the thing was built was just insane. But yeah, they weren't done. They were still must have still been on something, because they're on the wine or something, or spicy bolognese, because the next fork they came out with, that surpasses anything that even exists today, as far as commercially anyway. The Mazzocchi Super Monster. This thing was like a freaking motocross fork. It had 300mm of travel, and was, again, they're all very similar design internally. We're talking oil coil, and there's a lot of oil and some big coils inside these things, so absolutely ridiculous. The Junior T is a good fork, the Monster is a good fork, and the freaking Super Monster T was just insane. I mean, like, damn, 300mm of travel? Yeah. And then RockShox, on the other hand, well, once the Junior T had dropped, they came out with their own version, the RockShox Boxer 151. 150mm of travel, and I think I'm correct today. I'm sure it was 150mm travel, one-piece cast magnesium lowers, 20mm through axle. The Monsters, by the way, were still 20mm through axle, and the Junior T, I believe, was available in 20mm or QR. The Boxer came out next, but it was still dwarfed compared to the Mazzocchi forks. Then Mazzocchi would come out with a bit more sensible design. Well, actually, no, it's not sensible. Still not sensible. The Mazzocchi Shiva. They did a dual crown and a single crown version. The single crown version was 120mm travel, and the dual crown version was 190mm of travel off the top of my head. So that's pretty mad. I mean, not as bad as the Super Monster, but 190mm of travel, and you're probably thinking, that doesn't sound that exciting. Well, 35mm stanchions, but they flipped it. It's an inverted fork. It's an upside down fork, one of the first proper upside down man bite forks. So, that was pretty cool. Stupidly heavy, but smooth and a little bit flexy. The fact it was a inverted fork did mean it was way more flexy than a traditional fork. RockShox, meanwhile, came out with a new version of the Boxer. There's 200mm of travel, so hey, that's pretty cool. And I believe that would have been, no, not quite. We're not quite into the year of motion control. Not yet. It was around 2004. So then Mazzocchi would drop a far more sensible fork, the Mazzocchi AAA, or the 888. Now, this was a much more sort of sensible, conservative fork compared to the others. It was a bit stiffer than the Shiva. Again, lower legs with cast magnesium, 20mm bolt through axle, and you had various different damping options. Some of them were just basic portal orifice. It's basically a hole, the oil being forced through the hole, and you have a damper. Works very similarly to a salt and pepper shaker. So salt and pepper shaker, where you turn it and it covers part of the hole to restrict the flow of oil. That's basically how a portal orifice damper works. It's pretty primitive. RockShox, meanwhile, was about to unleash something that would almost put Mazzocchi in the dark, and you could argue later on didn't do Mazzocchi too many favours. RockShox came out with motion control, baby. Yeah, 2004, motion control. So it's basically a shim stack damper without the shim stack. You had adjustable compression and rebound, and there was a floodgate adjustment as well. So that was pretty incredible. So even with depending on what fork you had, RockShox pretty much launched this across their range. Was the Silo and the Boxer, and they did a more downhill, beefed up version called Mission Control later on. But it was basically a shim stackless shim stackless, shim stack damper. You'd have to see videos online to sort of just appreciate how well this worked. Yes, it was made of plastic, but it was made out of PA, similar plastic to PA6 glass reinforced nylon, and that the actual damper itself was pretty bulletproof. Whereas a shim stack damper, the shims would wear out eventually. The Shiva used the shim stack damper, but although they're reliable, they're only reliable to a point. You know, eventually those things will die. And these days there's no spare parts, so we won't get any spare parts for one of those, whereas the Boxer, the damper won't die, but the stanchions will. It's just how it is, which is a bit of a shame, but yeah, I have unfortunately got a Shiva. I received it from eBay, you know, it said spares repairs, and they was like, you know, what's wrong with it? You know, I took it apart, oh, there was metal in the oil, very bad sign, not good. That means the shims are destroyed, and they were. Anyway, so RockShox came out with the shim stackless, shim stack damper, motion control. Fantastic invention. You had 2004, motion control was sort of, you know, really hit the mainstream. I mean, I think it came out in 2003 for like race teams or something like that. Let us know if we are wrong on the year here. I'm pretty sure 2004 is correct though. This is all just going off memory, so yeah. Anyway, I digress. That was a big year, 2004. So later on, 2005, Mazzocchi keeps the 888, of course. Nothing wrong with the 2005 888. Updated the damping a little bit, and yeah, we still have the 888 through 2005 and 2006, whilst RockShox changes the design of the Boxer as well. There really isn't much happening in those years, but later, you know, as RockShox Boxer essentially sells more and more because of the more advanced damping and quite aggressive pricing, we start to see a few things happen. In 2007, Mazzocchi was pretty much acquired by Techno. I think it's 2007 the actual acquisition took place, and in 2008 a lot of the production was moved to China, allegedly to SR. Well, not allegedly, I've seen the actual proof inside of some of the forks myself. A lot of the production was done on the OEM side by SR Suntour. Yeah, your flash new Mazzocchi? It's now Suntour. Yeah, that's not great. And Mazzocchi came out, they dropped the ball, they released a fork called the Mazzocchi 55. Now this had TST damping. It stood for Terrain Selection Technology, and it was a half bladder damper crossed with a port and orifice damper. Now these things, not anyone really ever knew because the thing would break way before you had a chance to realise how good or terrible it was. The 55 was not a reliable fork, not in the slightest. You could say it's the fork that killed Mazzocchi. That might well be the case, you know. So that's, you know. And we just missed out one big thing before that was going on about the 888. Yeah, on the budget side, back in 2004, they also had the Mazzocchi drop off, and then later on they came out on the all-mounted enduro side, the Mazzocchi 66. Now, this was an absolutely fantastic fork. So when in 2008 they moved production to bleeding Taiwan, China, SR Suntour allegedly, on all forks but the 888, it was a huge blow to the industry, and eventually, you know, people stopped buying these Mazzoccis that were manufactured in 2008 and after because they just lost their reputation. It just shows that, you know, you can have a reputation like that and earn it over a course of years, and in literally a year, 2 years, you can destroy a reputation and no one buys your products anymore. That's just the way it is. And then Mazzocchi is now owned by Fox, which was one of Mazzocchi's big competitors, and of course